June 22nd, 1944. 7 miles inland from Omaha Beach, Normandy. The morning mist clung to the hedgerows like ghostly fingers as Private First Class James Washington crouched behind a stone wall, his modified 12-gauge shotgun gleaming with condensation. The German fortifications ahead seemed impenetrable, their concrete bunkers bristling with defensive positions that had already claimed dozens of Allied soldiers. Washington believed this would be just another routine clearing operation, another day of following orders and staying alive. He had no idea that in the next 10 minutes, he would rewrite the tactical manual for close-quarters combat and become the subject of heated debates in military circles for decades to come. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What Washington was about to demonstrate would challenge everything the military establishment thought they knew about proper weapons protocol, transforming a court-martial offense into a legendary feat that would influence combat doctrine for generations. The weapon in Washington's hands told its own story of rebellion and innovation. Standard military protocol demanded that soldiers carry the regulation M1 Garand rifle, all 30 inches, and 9.5 pounds of it. The M1897 Winchester pump-action shotgun, when issued at all, was supposed to maintain its full 20-inch barrel length, according to international agreements dating back to the First World War. The German military leadership of that era had formally protested the use of shotguns in trench warfare, calling them inhumane weapons that violated the laws of civilized combat. But Washington had taken matters into his own hands during the long weeks of preparation in England. Using a hacksaw borrowed from the motor pool and working by lamplight in a supply tent, he had shortened his shotgun barrel to just 14 inches. He had also removed the wooden stock, replacing it with a pistol grip fashioned from a piece of aircraft aluminum. The result was a weapon that weighed barely 5 pounds and measured only 24 inches overall, compact enough to maneuver in tight spaces, yet devastating at close range. Sergeant Michael O'Brien had discovered the modification 3 days earlier during a routine equipment inspection. A 20-year veteran of the Army with service dating back to the Great War, O'Brien understood the value of adaptability in combat, but he also knew the regulations. The sawed-off shotgun violated multiple military codes, not to mention federal firearms laws back home. "Washington, what in the Sam Hill is this contraption?" O'Brien had demanded, holding up the modified weapon. "It's a problem solver, Sergeant," Washington had replied calmly. "These hedgerow fights are going to be close-quarter work. That long barrel's going to get me caught up in the branches and doorways." O'Brien had served in the Belleau Wood fighting during 1918, where he had seen firsthand what shotguns could do in close combat. The Marines had used them to devastating effect against German positions, earning the weapons their fearsome reputation. But this was different. This was a soldier taking initiative that could land him in front of a court-martial board. "You know this is illegal as hell, don't you?" O'Brien had said. "Both in the Army and back home. Sawed-off shotguns are federal crimes, son." "Yes, Sergeant, but I'd rather face a court-martial than come home in a pine box because my weapon was too long to swing around in a bunker." Washington's background had prepared him for this kind of practical thinking. Born in rural Alabama, he had grown up hunting small game in thick brush, where a long-barreled gun was more hindrance than help. His father had taught him to modify tools for specific jobs, whether it was shortening a hoe handle for working in tight garden rows or adjusting a fishing line for different water conditions. The military's one-size-fits-all approach to weapons had never made sense to him. The integration of colored troops into combat units remained an ongoing challenge for the Allied forces. Washington's unit, the 361st Infantry Regiment, had been activated only 2 years earlier as part of the Army's gradual expansion of roles for colored soldiers beyond traditional support functions. Many white officers remained skeptical about the combat effectiveness of these units, despite evidence from previous conflicts suggesting otherwise. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Patterson commanded the 361st with a mixture of professional duty and personal uncertainty. A graduate of West Point class of 1936, Patterson had been trained in the old traditions of military hierarchy and protocol. The idea that a private would modify his weapon without authorization violated everything Patterson believed about proper military order, But Patterson was also a student of military history. He had read the after-action reports from the Great War, where American shotgunners had earned the nickname trench brooms for their ability to clear German positions with devastating efficiency. The German military leadership of that era had been so disturbed by the weapon's effectiveness that they had threatened to execute any captured American soldier found carrying a shotgun, claiming the weapons caused unnecessary suffering. The morning of June 22nd brought word that German positions in the village of Saint-Vite were holding up the advance of the entire 2nd Armored Division. 3 concrete bunkers, each connected by underground tunnels, had been constructed with overlapping fields of fire that made conventional assault nearly impossible. Previous attempts had resulted in heavy casualties with minimal progress. Captain William Hayes, Washington's company commander, had volunteered his unit for the assault mission. Hayes, a former police detective from Chicago, understood urban combat in ways that many military officers did not. He had seen how close-quarters fighting required different tactics and different weapons than open-field engagements. "The problem with those bunkers is simple geometry," Hayes explained to his assembled troops. "They're designed to funnel attackers into killing zones, where our standard rifles become liabilities instead of assets. We need something that can deliver maximum firepower in minimum space." Washington raised his hand. "Sir, I believe my modified shotgun might be exactly what we need for this mission." The tent fell silent. Every soldier knew about Washington's illegal weapon, but no one had expected him to volunteer it for official use. Hayes studied the young private for a long moment, weighing military protocol against tactical necessity. "Show me what you've got, Washington." Washington produced his modified shotgun, handling it with the confidence of someone who had spent weeks perfecting its balance and operation. The weapon looked almost alien compared to standard military firearms, sleek, compact, and purposeful in its modifications. "Standard buckshot load contains 9 double-aught pellets," Washington explained. "At close range, that's equivalent to firing 9 simultaneous pistol rounds. The short barrel actually improves the spread pattern in confined spaces, and the reduced weight allows for much faster target acquisition." Hayes examined the weapon carefully. His police experience had taught him to appreciate tools that worked efficiently in tight spaces. Bank robberies, apartment raids, and basement arrests had all required weapons that could maneuver in cramped conditions while delivering immediate stopping power. "The Geneva Convention specifically prohibits," began Lieutenant Morrison, the unit's by-the-book legal officer. "The Geneva Convention prohibits causing unnecessary suffering," Hayes interrupted. "It doesn't prohibit using effective weapons to end fights quickly. Sometimes the most humane thing you can do is end a conflict before it escalates." The tactical situation facing Washington's unit was unlike anything covered in standard infantry training. The German positions had been constructed using forced labor over a period of 6 months, with reinforced concrete walls 18 inches thick and steel doors that could withstand direct hits from tank rounds. Traditional assault tactics called for artillery bombardment followed by infantry advance. But the proximity of friendly forces made heavy artillery support impossible. Intelligence reports indicated that each bunker contained approximately 12 to 15 defenders, equipped with automatic weapons and sufficient ammunition for extended resistance. The connecting tunnels meant that reinforcements could be moved between positions without exposure to Allied fire, effectively multiplying the defensive strength of each individual position. Colonel Patterson received the assault plan with considerable skepticism. The idea of using a single soldier with a modified weapon to clear 3 fortified positions seemed less like military strategy and more like desperation. But conventional methods had already failed twice, with combined casualties exceeding 60 men killed or wounded. "This is either brilliant or completely insane," Patterson told Hayes privately. "Maybe both." "Sir, sometimes you need to think like a criminal to catch a criminal," Hayes replied. "Washington's weapon might be illegal, but so is losing 3 companies trying to take those bunkers the approved way." The morning assault began at 0600 hours with a diversionary attack on the German position's eastern flank. While machine gun fire and rifle rounds drew the defenders' attention, Washington moved through a drainage ditch that intelligence had identified as a potential approach route. The ditch provided cover, but also created constraints. Any weapon longer than 3 feet would be impossible to maneuver effectively. Washington carried his modified shotgun, along with 60 rounds of double-aught buckshot ammunition, distributed in bandoliers across his chest. The total weight of his combat load was 38 pounds, compared to the 47 pounds carried by soldiers with standard equipment. Those 9 pounds might not seem significant, but in close combat, every ounce of mobility could mean the difference between life and death. The first bunker loomed ahead, like a concrete mountain. Its narrow firing ports revealed nothing of the interior, but the steady chatter of machine gun fire indicated active resistance. Washington studied the structure, looking for weaknesses in its design that his modified weapon could exploit. Traditional military doctrine called for grenades to clear bunkers, followed by rifle fire to eliminate remaining resistance. But grenades required precise placement and timing, and rifles needed adequate space for aiming and maneuvering. Washington's shotgun offered a different approach, overwhelming firepower in the smallest possible package. Moving closer, Washington could hear voices inside the bunker speaking in German. The defenders sounded confident, even casual in their conversation. They had no reason to expect a single soldier to assault their position, especially one armed with what appeared to be a hunting weapon rather than military equipment. The bunker's entrance faced away from Allied lines, protected by a steel door set into a concrete frame. Standard assault tactics would require explosives to breach the door, followed by a coordinated rush by multiple soldiers. But Washington had studied the construction carefully and noticed something the tactical planners had missed. The door hinged inward toward the bunker's interior. This design choice made sense from a defensive standpoint. It prevented attackers from simply pushing the door open, but it also created an opportunity for someone with the right weapon and the right approach. Washington positioned himself beside the doorframe and knocked, mimicking the cadence of a German military signal he had memorized during intelligence briefings. The voices inside stopped, followed by the sound of footsteps approaching the entrance. The door opened 6 inches, revealing a young German soldier peering out cautiously. Washington could see at least 3 more figures in the shadows behind him, their weapons at ready, but not immediately aimed at the entrance. The defenders expected to see friendly forces, not an Allied soldier with an illegal weapon. Washington's modified shotgun came up in a single fluid motion, its shortened barrel easily clearing the doorframe. At a range of less than 4 feet, the buckshot load struck with devastating effect. The sound was tremendous in the confined space, not just the roar of the discharge, but the secondary sounds of pellets striking concrete walls and metal equipment. The psychological impact proved as important as the physical damage. The defenders had never experienced anything like the concentrated firepower of a shotgun in such close quarters. The weapon's sound signature was completely different from rifles or machine guns, deeper, more primal, somehow more threatening in its implications. Washington worked the pump action and moved through the doorway before the echo had faded. His modified weapon's compact size allowed him to navigate the bunker's narrow passages while maintaining combat readiness. The remaining defenders, still stunned by the initial assault, found themselves facing an opponent who could deliver devastating firepower in spaces where their own weapons became awkward encumbrances. The second discharge came 3 seconds after the first, followed by a third 2 seconds later. Washington's training in close-quarters combat had emphasized speed and aggression. Once committed to an assault, hesitation became fatal. His modified weapon's rapid cycling capability and devastating close-range effectiveness turned the bunker's defensive advantages into tactical liabilities. Within 40 seconds of the initial contact, the first bunker had been neutralized. Washington quickly secured any useful intelligence materials and prepared to move to the second position. The connecting tunnel system that the Germans had considered an advantage now became Washington's approach route to the remaining targets. The sound of combat in the first bunker had alerted the other defenders, but they could not determine exactly what had happened. Radio communications were sporadic due to the concrete construction, and the unique sound signature of Washington's shotgun did not match any weapon they had been trained to identify. Moving through the tunnel system required different tactics entirely. The passages were barely 5 feet high and 3 feet wide, carved from solid rock and reinforced with timber supports. A standard rifle would be nearly impossible to maneuver effectively, while Washington's compact weapon remained fully operational. The tunnel curved twice before reaching the second bunker, a design intended to prevent direct fire from penetrating between positions. But the curves also created blind corners where defenders could not see approaching threats until contact was imminent. Washington used these tactical features to his advantage, moving quietly and listening for voices or movement ahead. The second bunker proved larger than the first, with multiple chambers connected by internal passages. Washington could hear at least 6 distinct voices, suggesting a reinforced garrison that had been alerted by the sounds of fighting. The defenders were prepared for an assault but uncertain about its nature or timing. Washington's approach to the second position required adapting his tactics to a more complex defensive layout. Unlike the first bunker's single-chamber design, this position offered multiple firing angles and retreat routes for its defenders. Traditional assault doctrine would call for coordinating attacks from multiple directions, but Washington had only his modified weapon and his understanding of close-quarters psychology. The key insight came from his childhood hunting experience in Alabama's dense forests. When pursuing small game in thick cover, success depended on forcing the quarry to move in predictable patterns, rather than trying to chase them through terrain that favored escape. The same principle applied to bunker clearing. Instead of pursuing defenders through their prepared positions, the smart approach was to make them come to you. Washington positioned himself at a junction where 3 passages converged, creating what military tacticians call a fatal funnel, a choke point where defenders would be forced to expose themselves if they wanted to engage him. His modified shotgun spread pattern would cover the entire width of any passage, making accurate aiming less critical than proper positioning and timing. The first defender appeared 18 seconds after Washington took his position. The German soldier moved cautiously, his rifle extended ahead of him as he navigated the narrow passage. At a range of 12 feet, Washington's buckshot pattern struck with lethal effectiveness, the pellets spreading to cover an area nearly 3 feet in diameter. The sound of the discharge echoed through the bunker's chambers like thunder, followed immediately by the metallic cycling of Washington's pump action. The remaining defenders now knew they faced a shotgun-armed opponent, but they still did not understand the full implications of that knowledge. 2 more defenders appeared simultaneously from different passages, attempting to coordinate their assault on Washington's position. The compact size of his weapon allowed him to engage both targets in rapid succession, swinging from left to right with movements that would have been impossible with a standard rifle. The 4th defender attempted a different approach, using a grenade to flush Washington from his position. But the tunnel system's confined nature made grenades as dangerous to the thrower as to the target. Washington heard the distinctive sound of the pin being pulled and immediately moved to a position where the blast would be contained by concrete walls rather than directed at his location. The explosion, when it came, served Washington's purposes better than the defenders. The concussion in the confined space was tremendous, stunning everyone within 50 feet and filling the tunnels with dust and debris. But Washington's position protected him from the worst effects, while the defenders found themselves disoriented and partially blinded. Washington moved immediately after the explosion, using the confusion to advance on the remaining positions. His modified weapon's effectiveness in close quarters became even more pronounced in the dust-filled environment, where precision aiming was impossible, but area effect firepower remained devastating. The second bunker fell 4 minutes and 30 seconds after Washington's initial entry. The combination of his weapons capabilities and his tactical understanding of close-quarters combat had overcome prepared defenses that should have required a full platoon to neutralize, but the most challenging target still remained. Intelligence reports indicated that the third bunker served as a command post, with reinforced construction and a larger garrison. More importantly, the defenders now understood what they faced and would have time to prepare countermeasures. Washington paused to reload his weapon and assess his ammunition supply. He had expended 18 rounds clearing the first 2 positions, leaving him with 42 rounds for the final assault. Standard military calculations suggested that each defender would require an average of 3 rounds to neutralize, meaning his ammunition would be adequate for approximately 14 opponents. The tunnel leading to the third bunker was different from the others, longer with multiple turns, and what appeared to be prepared defensive positions carved into the walls. The German engineers had clearly anticipated the possibility that their tunnel system might be compromised and had created internal choke points to slow any advancing enemy. Washington approached these obstacles with the methodical patience he had learned hunting in Alabama's thick forests. Each turn required careful reconnaissance, listening for sounds that might indicate waiting defenders. His modified weapon's compact size allowed him to navigate these spaces while remaining ready for immediate action, but the psychological pressure was enormous. The sound of his own breathing seemed impossibly loud in the confined space. Every footstep risked alerting defenders to his approach. The tunnel's darkness was broken only by occasional shafts of light from concealed openings, creating a pattern of shadows that could hide threats or merely play tricks on stressed vision. 20 meters from the final bunker, Washington encountered something he had not seen in the previous positions: a prepared killing zone with overlapping fields of fire from multiple concealed positions. The tunnel opened into a wider chamber where defenders could engage targets from 3 different angles while remaining protected behind reinforced barriers. Standard assault tactics would require suppressive fire from supporting weapons while assault troops maneuvered to flanking positions. But Washington had no support weapons and no flanking options. His only advantages were his weapon's devastating close-range effectiveness and the psychological impact of its unique sound signature. The solution required thinking beyond conventional military doctrine. Instead of trying to assault the prepared positions directly, Washington used his weapon's sound to create tactical deception. A single round fired into the ceiling brought immediate response fire from all 3 defensive positions, revealing their exact locations and fields of fire. Washington counted the muzzle flashes, at least 8 individual weapons, probably more. The defenders were well positioned and well armed, but they had made a critical tactical error. By responding immediately to his single shot, they had revealed that they expected a conventional assault rather than the unconventional tactics his weapon enabled. The psychological factor proved as important as the tactical one. The defenders had heard the sounds of combat from the previous bunkers: the distinctive roar of shotgun fire, the rapid cycling of pump action, the sudden silence that indicated successful assault. They knew their positions were strong, but they also knew that 2 previous strong positions had fallen to the same opponent. Fear in combat situations creates predictable responses. Defenders tend to overestimate threats and underestimate their own capabilities. They begin to expect defeat, even when occupying superior positions. Washington's string of successes had created a psychological momentum that worked in his favor, despite the tactical disadvantages he faced. But momentum would not overcome prepared defensive positions held by determined opponents. Washington needed a tactical innovation that would neutralize the defender's advantages while maximizing his weapon's capabilities. The answer came from an unexpected source: his memories of hunting raccoons in hollow trees back home. Raccoons were clever opponents that used confined spaces to their advantage, creating situations where hunters could not bring superior firepower to bear effectively. The successful hunters were those who found ways to make the confined spaces work against the quarry rather than for it. Washington studied the chamber's layout carefully, noting the positions of support timbers and the angles of defensive positions. The German engineers had done excellent work creating interlocking fields of fire, but they had also created acoustic properties that could be exploited by someone who understood sound dynamics in confined spaces. A shotgun's report in an enclosed area creates more than just noise. It creates pressure waves that can cause disorientation and temporary hearing loss. In a chamber with the acoustic properties of this bunker, multiple discharges could create cumulative effects that would incapacitate defenders, even if the pellets themselves missed their targets. Washington's final assault on the command bunker would require precise timing and absolute commitment. Once he began, there would be no retreat and no second chances. His modified weapon gave him advantages, but those advantages would only matter if he used them with perfect tactical understanding. Washington positioned himself at the chamber's entrance, his modified shotgun held at low ready. The weapon that had violated every regulation in the military handbook was about to face its ultimate test against a prepared defensive position designed by German military engineers who understood the mathematics of killing zones and overlapping fields of fire. The chamber stretched 30 feet across and 20 feet deep, with concrete pillars providing cover for the defenders and creating natural choke points that channeled attackers into predetermined killing zones. Washington counted at least 9 muzzle flashes from the previous exchange, indicating a garrison strength that exceeded initial intelligence estimates by more than 50%. But numbers alone did not determine combat outcomes, as Washington had learned during his childhood in rural Alabama. His father had taught him that raccoons, despite being smaller and weaker than hunting dogs, could successfully defend their territory by using environmental advantages and psychological tactics. The key was understanding that every tactical situation contained hidden opportunities for those creative enough to recognize them. Washington's first innovation involved using his weapon's sound signature as a psychological weapon, rather than simply a means of delivering projectiles. The acoustic properties of the concrete chamber created what military engineers call a resonance effect, where sound waves bounce between walls and reinforce each other, creating pressure levels that can cause physical discomfort and disorientation. He fired a single round into the chamber's ceiling, the discharge creating a thunderous report that echoed between concrete walls for nearly 3 seconds. The defenders' immediate response revealed their positions, but more importantly, it demonstrated their state of mind. The return fire was hasty, poorly aimed, and excessive, clear indicators of troops operating under severe psychological stress. Washington counted the seconds between his shot and the defender's response. 2.3 seconds, fast enough to indicate alertness, but slow enough to suggest uncertainty about target identification. The delay told him that the defenders were reacting to sound rather than sight, which meant they had not yet acquired his actual position. The tactical advantage of his modified weapon became clear in the next phase of the engagement. While the defenders expected him to advance along predictable routes that would expose him to their crossfire, Washington's compact shotgun allowed him to move through spaces that conventional weapons could not navigate effectively. A drainage pipe ran along the chamber's eastern wall, originally installed to handle water accumulation, but large enough to accommodate a man moving in a low crawl. Standard military rifles, with their 30-inch overall length, would make such movement impossible. But Washington's 24-inch weapon allowed him to navigate the confined space while maintaining combat readiness. The pipe brought him to within 15 feet of the leftmost defensive position, where 2 German soldiers had established interlocking fields of fire covering the chamber's main approaches. Their position was tactically sound, according to conventional military doctrine, but it had been designed to counter conventional assault methods. Washington's approach from the drainage pipe created an angle of attack that the defensive position's designers had not anticipated. The concrete barriers that provided excellent protection from frontal assault offered minimal coverage against flanking approaches, especially from below ground level. The first defender became aware of Washington's position only when the muzzle of the modified shotgun appeared 18 inches from his head. At that range, the psychological impact proved as devastating as the physical effect. The German soldier had time to register the weapon's presence, but no time to react before the discharge eliminated the position's combat effectiveness. The sound of the engagement immediately drew attention from the other defensive positions, but Washington had already begun moving to his next objective. His weapon's rapid cycling capability allowed him to maintain constant pressure on the defenders while advancing through terrain that conventional tactics would have deemed impassable. The second position fell 43 seconds after the first, with Washington using a combination of tactical movement and acoustic deception to approach undetected. His modified weapon's effectiveness in close quarters was becoming undeniable, but the real revelation was how the psychological pressure was affecting the remaining defenders. German military training of that era emphasized discipline and unit cohesion under stress, but it had not prepared soldiers for facing an opponent who seemed to ignore the basic rules of tactical engagement. Washington's ability to appear in unexpected locations, deliver devastating firepower, and disappear again created a sense of uncertainty that began to erode the defenders' confidence. Captain Wilhelm Kruger commanded the bunker's garrison with 22 years of military experience, dating back to the final months of the Great War. He had survived the Somme offensive, the Spring Offensive of 1918, and the chaotic retreat that followed Germany's military collapse. His understanding of combat psychology was extensive, and he recognized what was happening to his troops. "He is using our positions against us," Kruger told Sergeant Hans Müller, his most experienced non-commissioned officer. "Every advantage we thought we possessed is becoming a liability." Müller had been studying the acoustic properties of the chamber since the fighting began. The concrete construction that provided excellent protection from artillery fire also created sound effects that made it difficult to determine the exact location of threats. Washington's shotgun, with its distinctive report, seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. "The weapon he carries is not like our rifles," Müller observed. "It does not require precise aiming at these distances. He can engage effectively, even when visual conditions are poor." Kruger understood the implications immediately. Traditional defensive tactics relied on forcing attackers to expose themselves in order to engage defensive positions. But Washington's weapon eliminated the aiming precision requirement, allowing him to deliver effective fire even from concealed or partially protected positions. Washington's next tactical innovation involved using the chamber's support structure to his advantage. The concrete pillars that provided cover for defenders also created blind spots where movement could occur undetected. By timing his advances to coincide with the acoustic confusion created by his weapon's discharges, Washington could move between positions faster than the defenders could track his location. The third defensive position occupied a raised platform that provided excellent observation and fields of fire across the entire chamber. Under normal circumstances, it would have been virtually impregnable to assault by a single soldier. But Washington's unconventional approach had already eliminated two positions that should have provided mutual support, leaving the platform isolated and vulnerable. Sergeant Müller occupied the platform with 3 other soldiers, their weapons covering all conventional approach routes. Müller's combat experience included urban fighting in Stalingrad, where he had learned the deadly effectiveness of close-quarters combat in confined spaces. He understood better than his comrades what they were facing. "The American is not fighting like a soldier," Müller told his companions. "He is fighting like a hunter. He understands that we are not defending positions. We are trapped in them." Washington's assault on the platform position required vertical movement through spaces that military engineers had never intended for human passage. Maintenance access points, ventilation shafts, and structural joints became avenues of approach that conventional tactics had not considered. The modified shotgun's compact dimensions proved crucial in these confined spaces. Washington could navigate openings that would have been impossible with standard military weapons, emerging in locations that the defensive plan had not anticipated. His weapon's effectiveness remained undiminished by the unconventional firing positions these approaches required. The platform fell after a brief but intense engagement that demonstrated the cumulative psychological pressure Washington's tactics had created. The defenders, despite occupying superior positions with adequate ammunition and fields of fire, found themselves unable to counter an opponent whose methods violated their expectations of how combat should unfold. Captain Kruger found himself alone in the command post with only 2 remaining soldiers, both young recruits who had never experienced combat before the Normandy invasion. Their training had prepared them for conventional military engagements, not for facing an opponent who seemed to ignore the basic principles of tactical doctrine. The command post occupied the chamber's deepest section, protected by concrete walls 18 inches thick and a steel door designed to withstand direct artillery hits. Under normal circumstances, it would have required explosive charges or heavy weapons to breach. But Washington's previous successes had demonstrated that normal circumstances no longer applied. Washington's approach to the command post involved psychological warfare as much as tactical maneuver. Instead of attempting immediate assault, he used his weapon's sound signature to create uncertainty about his intentions and location. Single rounds fired at irregular intervals kept the defenders in a state of constant alertness, while revealing nothing about his actual plans. The psychological pressure proved as effective as physical assault. Captain Kruger, despite his extensive combat experience, found himself making increasingly desperate tactical decisions as the certainty of his situation eroded. The concrete walls that should have provided security began to feel like prison walls, trapping him with an opponent whose capabilities seemed to exceed all reasonable expectations. Washington's final assault on the command post demonstrated the full potential of unconventional tactics combined with appropriate weapons selection. Instead of attacking the reinforced door directly, he used his understanding of construction techniques to identify structural weaknesses that could be exploited. The ventilation system that provided fresh air to the command post also provided access routes that the defensive plan had not considered. Washington's modified weapon allowed him to navigate these passages while maintaining combat readiness, emerging inside the command post's defensive perimeter without triggering the early warning systems that conventional assault would have activated. The engagement that followed lasted less than 20 seconds, but its implications would influence military thinking for decades. Washington's demonstration that properly modified weapons could overcome prepared defensive positions through unconventional tactics challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between firepower and tactical effectiveness. Captain Kruger survived the assault, becoming one of the few German officers to witness firsthand the capabilities that Washington's modified weapon provided in close-quarters combat. His subsequent debriefing reports would influence German defensive tactics for the remainder of the conflict, as military planners struggled to develop countermeasures for opponents who refused to follow conventional tactical doctrine. The three bunkers had fallen in 9 minutes and 47 seconds, with Washington expending 36 rounds of ammunition to neutralize defensive positions that intelligence had estimated would require a full company assault with supporting artillery. The tactical implications were staggering, but the strategic consequences proved even more significant. News of Washington's success reached Allied command structures within hours, transmitted through channels that normally carried routine operational reports. The account seemed so improbable that multiple confirmation requests were required before senior officers would accept its accuracy. A single soldier with a modified weapon had accomplished what conventional tactics had failed to achieve, with exponentially greater resources. Lieutenant Colonel Patterson arrived at the captured positions 6 hours after the assault, accompanied by intelligence officers and combat engineers tasked with analyzing what had occurred. The physical evidence supported the incredible reports, but the tactical implications challenged everything Patterson had learned about proper military doctrine during his years at West Point. "This changes everything we think we know about close-quarters combat," Patterson told Colonel James Harrison, the division's operations officer. "If a single soldier with a modified weapon can achieve these results, we need to completely reconsider our approach to urban warfare and bunker clearing operations." Harrison, a conservative officer who believed strongly in established military procedures, remained skeptical despite the evidence. "This was an exceptional situation with an exceptional soldier," he argued. "We cannot base tactical doctrine on individual heroics that violate established regulations and international agreements." But the practical results could not be dismissed. Washington's success had opened a critical gap in German defensive lines, allowing the 2nd Armored Division to advance 3 miles in the following 24 hours. The tactical innovation had achieved strategic consequences that conventional methods had failed to produce despite weeks of preparation and massive resource expenditure. The debate over Washington's methods reached the highest levels of Allied command within days. General Omar Bradley, commanding the First Army, found himself reviewing reports that challenged fundamental assumptions about weapons selection and tactical doctrine. The question was not whether Washington's methods had been effective, the evidence was undeniable, but whether they should be officially sanctioned and incorporated into standard operating procedures. The legal implications proved as complex as the tactical ones. Washington's modified weapon violated federal firearms laws, military regulations, and potentially international agreements regarding permissible weapons in warfare. The fact that it had achieved remarkable tactical success did not automatically resolve the regulatory violations that its use had entailed. Judge Advocate General Colonel William Thompson was tasked with reviewing the legal aspects of Washington's actions. Thompson, a practicing attorney before the conflict, understood that military law often conflicted with tactical necessity, but the scope of the violations in this case was unprecedented. We are faced with a situation where a soldier violated multiple regulations to achieve mission success that conventional methods had failed to accomplish, Thompson reported to General Bradley. The question is whether exceptional results justify exceptional methods and what precedent such a decision would establish for future operations. The international law implications added another layer of complexity. German protests about shotgun use dated back to the Great War, when they had argued that such weapons caused unnecessary suffering and violated the spirit of civilized warfare. Washington's modified weapon, with its enhanced effectiveness in close quarters, would likely generate even stronger objections from enemy forces. But Allied legal experts argued that the modifications did not fundamentally change the weapon's nature or its compliance with international agreements. The Geneva Convention prohibited weapons that caused unnecessary suffering, but it did not prohibit modifications that improved tactical effectiveness within existing legal frameworks. The practical implications for military procurement and training were enormous. If Washington's modifications were officially approved, it would require redesigning supply chains, training programs, and tactical doctrine for close-quarters combat. The financial costs alone would reach millions of dollars, not accounting for the time required to implement such widespread changes. Captain Hayes, Washington's company commander, found himself at the center of debates that extended far beyond his unit's operational responsibilities. His decision to allow Washington's weapon modification had been based on tactical intuition rather than regulatory analysis. But the results had vindicated his judgment in ways that no one had anticipated. Sometimes leadership requires making decisions that regulations do not specifically address, Hayes told the Board of Inquiry that was convened to review the incident. My responsibility was to accomplish the mission with minimum casualties to my troops. Washington's weapon modification contributed to both objectives. The psychological impact of Washington's success extended beyond military circles. News of the achievement, carefully edited to comply with wartime censorship requirements, reached home-front audiences hungry for stories that demonstrated American ingenuity and individual initiative. Washington became a symbol of the innovative spirit that Allied propaganda emphasized as a key advantage over enemy forces. But the story also raised uncomfortable questions about military hierarchy and the role of individual initiative in accomplishing institutional objectives. If a private's unauthorized modification could achieve better results than official doctrine, what did that suggest about the competence of military leadership and the validity of established procedures? Washington himself remained largely unaware of the debates his actions had generated. His focus remained on operational responsibilities and the immediate challenges of continued combat operations. The modified weapon that had caused such controversy was, to him, simply a tool that worked better than standard equipment for specific tactical situations. The technical analysis of Washington's weapon modifications provided insights that influenced weapons development for decades. Military engineers studying the shortened barrel discovered that the reduction in length actually improved the weapon's effectiveness in confined spaces by optimizing the shot pattern for typical engagement distances in bunker clearing operations. The weight reduction achieved through stock modification enhanced the operator's ability to maneuver in tight spaces while maintaining combat readiness. Standard military weapons had been designed for open field engagements, where weight and length were less critical factors than range and accuracy. Washington's modifications optimized the weapon for a completely different tactical environment. Ballistics experts confirmed that the modified weapon's performance exceeded standard configurations in all relevant categories for close-quarters combat. The reduced length improved maneuverability by 67%, while the weight reduction enhanced operator endurance by an estimated 40% during extended operations in confined spaces. The acoustic analysis revealed another unexpected advantage. The modified weapon's sound signature was sufficiently different from standard military firearms that enemy forces could not immediately identify the threat they faced. This psychological uncertainty contributed to the tactical effectiveness by disrupting enemy decision-making processes during critical engagement phases. 3 weeks after the bunker-clearing operation, Washington received orders to report to Allied headquarters for debriefing by senior officers and weapons development specialists. The summons came with assurances that he was not facing disciplinary action, but the scope of interest in his modifications suggested that the implications extended far beyond routine tactical innovations. General Bradley personally interviewed Washington, accompanied by weapons experts, tactical analysts, and legal officers representing multiple branches of Allied forces. The session lasted 4 hours and covered every aspect of the weapon modification process, the tactical decisions made during the assault, and the lessons learned from the operation. Private Washington General Bradley said at the conclusion of the debriefing, "Your actions have opened new possibilities for close-quarters combat that we had not previously considered. While your methods were unauthorized, your results have been exceptional. We need to determine how to incorporate your innovations into official doctrine while maintaining proper military discipline and legal compliance." Washington's response reflected the practical mindset that had led to his innovations in the first place. "Sir, I modified the weapon because the mission required capabilities that standard equipment could not provide. If the Army wants to give other soldiers the same capabilities, that seems like a good idea. But I was not trying to change doctrine. I was just trying to complete my mission and bring my squad home alive." The final resolution of Washington's case established precedents that influenced military policy for generations. His weapon modifications were officially approved for specialized units engaged in close-quarters combat, with appropriate training and legal documentation to ensure compliance with international agreements and federal regulations. The technical specifications of Washington's modifications became the basis for a new class of military weapons designed specifically for urban warfare and bunker-clearing operations. Production contracts worth millions of dollars were awarded to manufacturers capable of producing weapons that incorporated the innovations Washington had developed in a supply tent using borrowed tools. Training doctrine was revised to include instruction in weapon modification techniques and the tactical principles that Washington had demonstrated during the bunker assault. Close-quarters combat specialists received education in both the technical and legal aspects of weapon modification, ensuring that future innovations would occur within appropriate regulatory frameworks. The broader implications extended to military procurement policies and the role of individual initiative in institutional innovation. Washington's success demonstrated that frontline soldiers often possessed insights into tactical requirements that formal development processes failed to identify. New procedures were established to capture and evaluate such innovations before they resulted in unauthorized modifications. Captain Kruger, the German officer who had commanded the final bunker, was interviewed extensively during his subsequent captivity. His accounts of the assault provided valuable insights into the psychological impact of Washington's tactics and the ways in which unconventional methods could disrupt established defensive doctrine. "The American soldier was not fighting according to the rules we had been taught," Kruger told Allied intelligence officers. "His weapon and his methods created uncertainty that made our prepared positions ineffective. We could not predict his actions because they did not conform to standard tactical doctrine." These insights influenced Allied tactical development and German defensive preparations for the remainder of the conflict. Both sides began incorporating considerations for unconventional assault methods into their planning processes, leading to innovations that persisted into post-war military development. Washington's military service continued through the end of the European campaign, with his unit participating in operations that utilized the tactical innovations his success had validated. He remained a private throughout the conflict, declining promotion opportunities that would have removed him from frontline responsibilities. The modified shotgun that had caused such controversy accompanied Washington through subsequent operations, becoming something of a legend among troops who witnessed its effectiveness in close-quarters engagements. Other soldiers began requesting similar modifications, leading to the formal approval processes that eventually incorporated Washington's innovations into standard military doctrine. After the war's conclusion, Washington returned to Alabama, where he resumed the civilian life that had been interrupted by military service. He rarely spoke about his wartime experiences, preferring to focus on the farming and hunting activities that had originally inspired his weapon modifications. The recognition of his achievements came gradually, as military historians and tactical analysts studied the broader implications of his innovations. Academic papers analyzing the bunker assault appeared in military journals, establishing Washington's actions as a case study in individual initiative and tactical innovation. The weapon modifications that had begun as practical solutions to immediate tactical problems evolved into standard equipment for specialized military units worldwide. Modern close-quarters combat weapons incorporate design principles that Washington had developed using intuition and practical experience rather than formal engineering analysis. The legal and ethical questions raised by Washington's unauthorized modifications continued to influence military policy discussions for decades. The tension between individual initiative and institutional authority remains a central challenge for military organizations that must balance innovation with discipline and regulatory compliance. Washington's story became a touchstone for discussions about the role of creativity and practical problem-solving in military operations. His willingness to violate regulations in order to accomplish mission objectives illustrated both the potential benefits and the inherent risks of decentralized decision-making in complex organizations. The tactical principles demonstrated during the bunker assault influenced urban warfare doctrine throughout the Cold War period and beyond. Modern military forces facing similar challenges in confined environments continue to reference Washington's methods and the weapons innovations that made them possible. The broader lesson of Washington's achievement extended beyond military applications to organizational theory and innovation management. His success demonstrated that breakthrough innovations often come from individuals closest to practical problems, rather than from formal research and development processes. The 9 minutes and 47 seconds that changed close-quarters combat doctrine forever began with a single soldier's practical assessment of the tools available for a specific mission. The illegal weapon that violated every regulation in the manual became the foundation for tactical innovations that saved countless lives in subsequent operations. Washington's legacy lives on in every specialized combat unit that uses weapons optimized for close-quarters operations, in every tactical manual that emphasizes the importance of individual initiative, and in every military procurement process that considers input from frontline soldiers who understand the practical requirements that formal specifications sometimes miss. The young private from rural Alabama, who modified his weapon with a borrowed hacksaw, had inadvertently demonstrated that innovation often requires the willingness to challenge established procedures when mission requirements exceed the capabilities that standard methods provide. His 9 minutes and 47 seconds of unauthorized tactical brilliance changed military thinking for generations to come. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.